YouTube, etc.?
We are live on YouTube, but we are recording it as well. So we will be using it for a podcast episode, which you can, access it on everything from YouTube to iTunes to everything.
Okay, great.
So welcome to our series on the future of agriculture in India. Today we are discussing the recent farm reforms that the current government brought in. And surrounding which there has been quite a lot of controversies with farmers erupting into protest. So we have with us today Barun S. Mitra and Chakravarti Nalamotu. Both of them have worked either in the agricultural sector or with the agricultural sector to some extent. Barun is a free thinker and he writes regularly for Financial Express and many other publications. He was the founder director of Liberty Institute, which was a libertarian think tank based out of New Delhi. Chakravarti Nalamotu is a management graduate and former management consultant. He currently does farming full time and is based out of Andhra Pradesh. Basically, we'll first discuss the bills, and then we'll dive into the larger issues surrounding the Indian agriculture. So, Barun, you currently wrote an very interesting piece titled "Why I Cannot Support the Recent Farm Bills" for the Financial Express. So, why don't you basically go around that article and try to explain to us your point of view on why the recent farm bills, maybe do not do not stand the scrutiny of reforms.
Yeah, we need to ask, that what do we mean by reforms? And I think there are some very fundamental challenges that this bill has posed. For instance, just let's take the one that's generally the simplest. That is the Essential Commodities Act. That's a, 50, 60-year-old act, a central act. And the government says it has tried to liberalize it by removing some items from which can be brought under its purview, like onions and potatoes. But what it has also done, and which it doesn't highlight, but which is also true, that under the same act, there are two categories now, which were not there earlier, that apart from all the emergencies, natural and otherwise, there is a clause that says if the prices of fruits and vegetables, particularly vegetables, because vegetables are the ones that go up and down, fruits too, but probably it doesn't attract that much attention. That in case of vegetable, if the prices rise by 100%, the government would have the right to invoke Essential Commodities Act. And in case of grains, such as rice and wheat, or particularly dal, lentils, because the lentil prices do go up quite significantly over the years or during the season, during off season and on season. And then if the food grain prices rise by 50%, then the government has the option to intervene, which means that it has basically broadened and strengthened the Essential Commodities Act rather than diluting it. So, and to me, the best sign of government intention would have been if it had said that this is a central law, its time has passed, and now we are simply deleting it. The reason why this is critical is because this is the law because of which investment in logistics, storage doesn't happen in India in the formal sector. This is the law that the government, the state government, the district administration has repeatedly invoked to crack down on storage in the, accusing traders for hoarding when the prices go up. What it ignores is that the government of India is the largest hoarder of food grain in the world. By far. This year, they're probably going to have about 80 to 90 million tons of food grains. our PDS system barely needs 25 million tons a year. So we are ending up holding this much, distorting the market, the prices, and wasting a huge amount in storage, and then facilitating pilferage, because that's how some of the traders make up their losses by buying low-cost grains from the government sector and then selling it in the market. So this is a complete mess. And the government has actually strengthened it rather than diluting it. That's number one. Number two is the law which Chakravarti is perhaps most familiar. That's the law regarding marketing, and therefore an attempt to reform it's not really an attempt to reform the APMCs, because the APMCs are under the state law, the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committees. They are governed by each state in different ways. But the central law now says that in the name of opening the market, it says that now there can be alternative markets where the laws and regulations of APMC, particularly the taxation laws, won't apply. Which means that now we have a two-tier market for agriculture, where a private sector can open a market and set up their own trade without having to pay the taxes that the state government collects from the official APMC. There are two aspects to this. One is in states like Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, where substantial amounts of grains are procured by the government, the state governments collect a lot of taxes. In Maharashtra as well, a few thousand crores each year. Which means that the central government is willy-nilly trying to undermine the financial powers of the state government. And secondly, what it's doing is that, and which is actually the case with the central government and everybody who's talking about APMC reforms never mentions, is Bihar in the east abolished APMC in 2006. It's been 15 years. If APMC were to set a revolution in agriculture marketing, Bihar is still waiting for that revolution. I'm amazed that the government of India and everyone who talks about it either ignores it or says that it's Bihar. Meaning that since Bihar, the government capacity is pretty poor, so it doesn't matter what the law is, it will never get implemented in one way or the other. Instead, what I have heard from my farmer friends in Bihar is that the state government is now giving away the APMC yards to private sector, including large corporations, to run it as private business. APMCs, which were supposed to be committees of farmers and traders, that property is now accessible to private corporations. One doesn't know what's the commercial terms that they're going to get, if at all any. This is surely not the way to open the markets. The third one is regarding contract farming. What is again forgotten is that 25 to 50% of Indian agriculture is under some kind of contract or the other. Either it's an informal relation, understanding between brothers, that one brother is farming for the whole family with an understanding that others will get a share, or it's under an understanding with the local trader, moneylender. And I'm told that in states like Odisha, this type of informal contract can run into multiple years. That is, farmers and traders can come into a contract that the farmer will commit his produce to that particular trader for the next 3 years. Which basically means that the farmer, and this is true in advanced states such as Haryana and Punjab. There are both situations where large farmers or families, prosperous families, have moved abroad, cannot themselves farm their land, and have given their land to tenant farmers or to local farmers who can rent the land on a yearly or multiple year basis and share in the rent. And in Punjab, it has been the other way around as well. That smaller farmers have preferred to give away their land on rent or lease to larger farmers, so that the larger farmer can consolidate and have a more profitable, more viable agriculture. Basically means that Indian farmers are smart enough. They have been engaging in contracts of various kinds, and those contracts were largely informal, and they were informal for a reason. That is, the cost of undertaking a formal contract and the cost of enforcing a formal contract is prohibitively high, particularly if you are a small and marginal farmer. It's impossible. Whereas informal contracts are respected by the community in which they live. And therefore, the percentages of disputes are much lower because people know each other. There is a social compulsion to respect what is rightfully belongs to somebody else. Instead of understanding this issue, the government of India has now created layers of contract rules and enforcement mechanism through the SDM at the district level to solve disputes which would be beyond the reach of most farmers. Which basically means that the government of India and those who drafted the bills really have either no understanding of how agriculture works in India or have interests other than what they have stated. And therefore, to compare it with 1991 as India's liberalization moment, I think is a complete misnomer. For a change, just think of it. Those of us who lived through 1991 can recall that 1991 was never hailed by the government of the day nor by the opposition as a great moment for India. In fact, there were only two grounds for it. Government and the supporters of the reform said it was necessary because we had no money, the foreign exchange crisis had hit, and therefore this was inevitable and necessary. And the opponent said that this is all under the pressure of World Bank and IMF. No one hailed 1991 as a path-breaking moment as it is hailed today, because no one knew how it's going to play out. Secondly, 1991 began primarily as a trade reform. That is, India's trade restrictions on import and export came down significantly, the tariffs and the duties, etc. And India decided to unilaterally liberalize its international trade. What has happened with the current set of agricultural laws is that just when the parliament, the Lok Sabha was passing these bills in middle of September, on that very date, the Commerce Ministry of Government of India issued a notification saying that onion trade will be immediately and completely, or onion export will be stopped with immediate effect, and which meant that for 1 week, the exporters whose producers were in the pipeline waiting outside the ports, the trains that had left Maharashtra for Bangladesh became uncertain whether it's going to be allowed to enter. For 1 week, there was complete uncertainty regarding what's going to happen to these onions. Which clearly means that 1991 has no relevance, neither for its big picture, nor for its specific approach to trade liberalization, to these agricultural bills. So in my view, I really acknowledge and want APMC markets to be reformed, and agricultural trade should be liberalized within India and externally. I completely would support if there was an attempt to abolish the Essential Commodities Act. And I really want the farmers to have contracts in a way that they can actually enforce and be able to manage it. I do not want a contract where most farmers it would be beyond the reach of most farmers. I don't want an APMC system that runs in parallel with the alternative system and creates further chaos. And I don't want an Essential Commodities Act that is expanded rather than the one that ought to have been shrunk. So those are my basic comments regarding the three bills.
So before we get to Chakravarti, I I would just like you to elaborate on the APMC reforms that you were talking about, Barun. So you said that you would welcome an APSC reform. So what kind of reform are we talking about here?
Primarily the problem with the APMC is that it has become a de facto monopoly. And states have tried to deal with this issue in various ways. For instance, Maharashtra, over the last few years, they have taken away fruits and vegetables from the scope of APMC. Punjab and Haryana, where the procurement of rice and wheat is maximum as a percentage of their total produce, the APMCs are extremely organized to be able to enable such large-scale transaction in a relatively short time. The problem is that because it's a monopoly, the government also seeks to benefit by imposing taxes. And because it's a monopoly, the APMC markets impose cesses and other transaction fees, which on many occasions are simply unjustified in a normal market sense. So if those reforms are carried out, and it can only be carried out locally because APMCs are extremely location specific. Because the producers are different in different states. The requirements are different. And therefore, the best way to reform the APMCs would be firstly for the government to say, and as the central government is saying, that we should not tax, then the government should say that we should not tax across the board, not apply it selectively. And just like they did with the GST, some state governments may need a degree of support to make the transition, so that the degree of support would have to be provided just like it is being provided under GST. And thirdly, the opening should be real opening. In fact, I'm sure Chakravarti can tell us that even today, across India, farmers always had the freedom to sell to whoever they wanted at their own farm gate. That is, if anyone came to their fields, they could sell their produce to anyone at whatever price that suited both. There was no restriction. Why didn't it happen? It didn't happen for the simple reason that very few traders are in a position to undertake that kind of transaction with multiple farmers spread out over a district or a tehsil or a panchayat. And therefore, what we have is aggregators, that local aggregators who buy from small farmers and then take it to the larger market, sort it out in terms of different grades of quality or sizes, and then market it to the larger traders. This is a service that has to be provided. The same service in a way is carried out in APMC. The same service is carried out by the aggregators. So if the aggregators are performing this service, then you just recognize them as traders. Which means that we have a whole system functioning in this country, often inefficiently, because of the regulations that are already in place. So if we really want reform, we need to understand how the system is functioning, where are the choke points, the regulatory choke points, and how those choke points can be eliminated. Then you'll have reform. And this reform, particularly regarding APMC, ought to come from the states, because that's where it started.
So, Barun, there are two things here.
What this APMC law is doing is, it is centralizing agriculture in a way no one thought was constitutionally valid. The government now says it is constitutionally valid to control agriculture indirectly, and in effect control the finances of the states indirectly. Although all of us generally have been taught for the last few decades that agriculture is like land, is a state subject, and it's the state government that are best placed to figure out how to modify it depending on their local circumstances.
So, Barun, I'd just like to add two things here. One would be that since we did talk about how a farmer is, anyway free to sell his or her produce to anybody who comes to his farm gate. So just a statistic here, only 25% of the produce anyway was sold through APMCs, 75% of it was sold in an open market. That's
Correct.
true. But having said that, we should also acknowledge the informal nature of this market. And since it was an informal economy of sorts, where anybody could come by from the farmer directly, and it was illegal. So there was this illegal nature to it, despite the fact that the laws were never enforced per se. But any company would definitely not invest. Any big corporation, any even medium-sized company would not invest in a sector where the legality is somewhat blurred. And that's the first thing. And the second thing that I just wanted to add regarding the legality of the bills, since you did say that agriculture is definitely a state subject, but the central government's defense here goes like this: that here they are simply upholding the basics of common market. So this, according to them, is again about interstate trade as well. As much as it is about agriculture, uh, it's also about interstate trade.
Yeah, I mean, that's true that it is about interstate trade, and there's a constitutional provision for it. There is a concurrent list where the trade across states can be regulated by the central government. Correct? But then shouldn't it be applied logically? Central government now says that it's making agriculture tax free. If it is so keen to make agricultural produce trade in agricultural produce tax free, why doesn't it do it for all the other goods? Why does it impose a GST? I mean, that's for interstate trade. So the government is hypocritical in trying to do this. The informal part of it is a consequence of the regulatory framework that we have, and I said it already, that if we really looked into those regulatory criteria that is leading to informality, you remove those regulatory conditions, rather than create another layer of regulations saying that you are trying to override the informal sector. Informal sector is not a criminal sector. Informal sector exists precisely because the government has regulated in a manner in which normal market transactions cannot take place in a competitive and economically viable manner. Therefore, they are transacted in cash in the informal sector. It's happening as a consequence of the regulations. So instead of trying to understand and identify those regulations which is causing this informality, we now have a separate tier of regulations on top of it. Of course, all this discussion doesn't answer why Bihar didn't benefit in the last 15 years from abolishing APMCs. And there's hardly any evidence of any large-scale storage, procurement, market facilities having emerged in Bihar in the last 15 years. In fact, every farmer in Bihar told me in the last 2 weeks that I've been trying to reach out, that their prices in Bihar is typically more depressed than rest of India. And now I discovered there's a simple reason for it. 85% of the population in Bihar receive some kind of PDS, which means rice and wheat can be procured at 2 rupees, 3 rupees, 5 rupees, whatever it is. And if 85% of the people are buying at least part of their rice and wheat from the PDS, who's going to buy from the farmer? And therefore, last decade and a half, the prices in Bihar typically has been on the lower side than the market price across India. And there's been not many takers coming in. The only item that seems to have really developed is maize, that is makkah. And that has another reason for it. And probably one big reason is that because farmers in Bihar do not have much opportunity to sell their produce, rice and wheat, to the procurement agency, because hardly any procurement is done in Bihar. Therefore, many of them may have moved to Makkah, the maize, and there are traders and seed companies and other trading companies who have come in, who are buying Makkah, and that market is much more developed. And Bihar is actually now one of the strong base in India for maize production. But apart from that, and which seems to be an accident of the way the PDS system and the procurement has worked out, than any direct design or intention by anybody. And therefore, we need to look at the regulatory bottlenecks that is causing the problem, rather than seeking another layer of regulation to override it.
Makes sense. So I also have my 2 cents to add on specific context in Bihar, but I'll hold that since Chakravarti sir hasn't really spoken about the reforms, and he's been listening to us very patiently. And so over to you, Chakravarti sir. What do you make out of the farm bills and Barun's opposition to it?
You have to unmute.
You're still on mute.
I didn't mute it. It went on mute. I don't know how it happened. My phone has been ringing. Maybe that's why. Anyway, let me get to it. So I have read Barun's article in Financial Express, and I've listened to him now keenly. So his reservations, his concerns are valid. However, the reason I mentioned that to Barun also, why I was critical about it is, all things said and done, I mean, what we have in power is not a liberal government per se. Not only they're not liberal, if you look at, this is the second term of the NDA that we are looking at, they have done a great deal of I'm so sorry. So the decisions that have been taken, whether it is GST.
Sir, could you just repeat it again? So could you just repeat it from the beginning itself? Because there was some disruptions, and since we are also recording it for the podcast, it might be better that we basically.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, I have read Barun's article in Financial Express, and I've listened to him keenly right now. And I agree with most of the reservations he has. But the broader point I would like to make is, NDA, this is the second term of NDA. Some of the decisions they have taken so far, even though it's a right-wing government and we have been promised, minimal government, maximum governance, something like that, if I remember correctly, or minimal government, maximum governance. I think that's what that was the call that was given. But we were stuck with GST. We have to endure demonetization. Then beyond that, we have to endure highest taxation on the fuel in the world. Then very selective duties being imposed on imports to help certain friendly business groups. Then we had to endure, after 6 or 7 years of a right-wing government, we still have to endure bailouts to large banks, even public sector companies. The easiest ones like Air India continue to exist, and we keep giving them tens of thousands of crores, which is billions of dollars. In such an environment, a bill like this, which at least makes an attempt to deregulate, I wouldn't call the entire bill completely useless, but it makes an attempt, whether it is in the future contract space and making it easier for movement of goods across the state lines, whether to make at least an attempt to end the kind of trader monopoly that exists in APMCs that I practically endure every season, if not every day, is a welcome signal. At least, it's a step in the right direction. Is it ideal? It's not. For instance, they have removed all those cess fees and everything else, and they've even said, the state governments should not impose, which I opposed very bitterly, because it now they are crossing their bounds and are interfering in the state affairs. But the question Barun says is, why just agriculture? Why not other goods? Right? Why this selective treatment for agriculture? I'm saying any tax reduction or elimination is a welcome move, and then we can add for more tax benefits, right? Rather than saying, why just this? And in terms of contract farming, practically any other farmer that I know engages in contract farming, but they're not in formalized channels. What would be really ideal, even for me, as a grower of sweet lime, would be a commodities exchange. Not just contract farming, but a futures contracts market where I could trade in commodities. Because it's hard enough to find a buyer who will come, and then I'll have to deliver the goods and things like that. But just an effective marketplace where we could just trade future commodities in sweet lime and whatever. If you look at the Western markets, they have right from pork to corn to beef to oranges. They can all be traded without any physical exchange of goods, right? We without going through that hassle of having to exchange the goods. These contracts can be traded on a commodities market. That would have been more ideal, right?
So basically,
but I can't.
Yeah, basically like
Yes.
mercantile exchanges in the US. So
Yeah,
basically, like
commodities
mercantile
exchanges
exchanges that
right?
do exist in the US. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, like whether it's oil trading or pork, as I said, the whole bunch of things that are traded, right? Corn, you name it. So that would be ideal. But because it is not done, I said this bill is not good. But at least somebody's thinking that farmers need contracts, and they need to enter into these contracts so that they get some insurance, right? Some protection. Like I invest for the entire year, and end of the year there is some sort of natural calamity. If I lose my entire investment, then the next year I can't even do agriculture, right? Some protection, some insurance, if I can get it, nothing like it. And that's what these future contracts and really help the futures trading or contracts really help farmers. So at least somebody's thinking, and it is moving in the right direction. So long story short, number one, I didn't have any reservations with what Barun said, but I'm glad at least it is a move or a step in the right direction. Two, I feel a bigger threat today is the left propaganda that is in overdrive, right? Ambanis will take over agriculture. How will a farmer with 2 acres of land tract will negotiate with Birla? I mean, these are the kinds of nonsensical arguments that they are making. I feel as liberals and people who believe in the markets, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. I mean, the communists now are full steam, going ahead and hammering away how horrible this is, and how the APMC market great. We should keep it here. We should not let private sector come in, and so forth. And they just practically in that area where we counter their arguments. You turn the TV on, the liberal voice talking about free markets or free movements of goods, or farmers' ability to fix the farmers' ability to trade freely and get the market price. Those are the issues that we're facing. And in terms of Essential Commodities Act, from a practical perspective, it is so draconian, I just cannot even describe the previous one.
I think the connection broke again. Hello, the connection is broken.
Yeah, I think
The connections.
Yeah, I think we should just wait for a minute or two.
I'm so sorry. So, you guys there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could just continue from where
Because
you
I'm
left. So
terribly sorry because see the thing is I did some I think Barun might have missed. I hope Akash you can edit this out. Barun, I got a wrong machine and that machine is not designed to have this call. So I'm doing this call on the phone. My employees keep calling me. I keep telling them, but I want them all, but they're calling me. So I am extremely sorry. It's bad planning on my side. The laptop I got was didn't have the webcam.
not a problem, sir. So what we
Okay.
could do is that
So
we
let me
could
go through my
just edit that out.
what I yeah. So what I promised Barun is that while he speaks about the general agriculture policy issues, I'll share some of my experiences. So the red gram, when the prices of red gram have shot up, I think few years ago, I don't remember which year. I just cannot tell you how they were raiding anybody who even holds 1 or 2 tons of red gram. They have said we are going after traders. Any farmer who harvested red gram from the farm, if they are taking to the market yard, that's how the abuse of power was. They have caught them up. They bring the media guys, they parade them, and there's a big news saying we have caught these red gram smugglers. Right? These are the people who are hoarding. This is what Essential Commodities Act has done to the system, the bureaucracy. They will abuse it in every shape and form, once it becomes essential. Now, is the current Essential Commodities Act better? I believe so, in the sense because they have taken out many of those commodities out of the purview, but they have added these caveats, right? I think 50% increase in non-perishable commodities will allow the government to intervene, and I think 100% in perishables, something like that. And that Barun had reservation with. I do not agree. I completely agree with him. I would love to have all of those removed, but the fact that these commodities are out of this act itself is helpful in many ways. And then I'll give you some examples of what is going on. Some of them help, some of them hurt. See, my friend does maize farming in Mahbub Nagar. He has decided to do it on a large scale. Now, maize farming manually is highly ineffective, so he has gotten a seed drill to push to plant the maize from Italy. Right? He went to some Italian company, and then they had it shipped, the seed drill, which costed a few lakhs. Then spraying the chemicals like pesticides on this is very, very cumbersome. So he got this boom spray. I don't know if you guys ever seen it. It's a really long pipe. Again, that cost few lakhs. He's done all this. He has even gone through one season of maize. Then this coronavirus has come into play and the market went down. The second season he's ready and the government says no maize exports. His entire investment gone down the toilet. Right? Now, will that not happen in the future? It will, but again, at least I feel that 50% margin is better than whimsical executive somewhere randomly deciding, because do you know how the maize thing came into picture? The chicken lobby, the people who grow chicken have reached out to, again, this is my guess, because there is always behind every government policy, there is some big business house or businessmen lobbying in the greater interest of the nation. That is the argument we always hear. The chicken lobby has demanded that the government allow chicken imports or ban.
The connection's broken again. Hello?
Yeah, just I think we'll just wait for a minute or two, and then Then once he's back, we'll resume.
Actually, let me just add while we are waiting for him to connect that the poultry industry has been one, along with the flower industry, they were decimated by the lockdown of coronavirus, virtually decimated.
Makes sense. So,
Yeah, and therefore this restriction that Chakravarti spoke of on export probably came up.
yeah,
Some poultry and feed industry would have told the government that we are finished, and therefore, if you stop export, we might be able to buy the feed at a lower cost. And this is exactly what happens when we hand over power to the central government. And to me, that is my single biggest objection, the fundamental objection, that all these three laws have centralized agriculture. And I think it's going to cost us much more than what benefits the laws might bring in, if at all, anything in the immediate term.
so, but Varun, I also wanted to take this opportunity to basically discuss the discourse that's going around on these three bills, and yours is very unique perspective. I mean, the common opposition that we are listening to on media day in and day out goes like this: that now that the Essential Commodities Act has been changed, there would be hoarding, traders will collude, prices would go up. Then things like if this bill has to basically go through, then they should also bring MSP into the private sector, which, according to me, would be akin to price controls. That's literally price controls. If you try to force private players to
lead to nationalization of agriculture.
Yes, indeed, that would be nationalization of agriculture in a sense. So all these are the points that we hear on TV
Actually, on
debates.
these last 2 points, Chakravarti earlier was saying that this is being raised by the left. I mean, the left is hardly existent in India today, but the two Sangh Parivar affiliates, BJP affiliates, the Bharatiya Kisan Sangh and the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, both have raised this objection. In fact, they have all asked for the MSP to be made mandatory, that all private traders should buy at MSP. So the opposition it is unfair to say that the opposition to the bill is coming only from the left, because to me, as far as Indian politics today is concerned, the left is almost irrelevant.
Yeah, but also the one thing to note here is also that Congress has also jumped on the wagon, and the most from the most audible voices that we hear on TV debates are of course not just from the left but also from Congress, and also people who are connected to both Bharatiya Kisan Sangh and the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. That's definitely there. But basically, all this anti-market sentiment that we could sum up. I mean, no matter what the source is.
Anti-market sentiments are primarily because both the BJP and the opponents of this bill, they want the central government to control agriculture. Only they want to control it in the way they desire. Agriculture is generally was believed to have been a state subject. I think it still should be, because agriculture can only be produced locally. Ideally, it should be a local subject.
But
the land production are all local, and therefore, I really don't believe. And now, after 30 years of 1991, I'm now convinced that centralization of reform will only lead to a bad outcome, a worse outcome. Reforms, to make sense, have to allow power of the central government devolve to the lower tiers, so that citizens have a more direct access to the law. Let me just give you one example. 1991 and the 20 years since, till about 2007-8, there was a broad political consensus that India is trying to reform one way or the other, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, but still it was going in a direction on which there was a political consensus. But over the last 10 years, that consensus has evaporated in the previous UPA 2 government as well as now. What's the result? The result is 30 years after 1991, the central government on one fine day decided to impose a lockdown and the whole economy came to a halt. That's a disaster. And you know why that happened? That happened because 1991 reforms, whatever they were all carried out at the central level. So the government, when it carries out reforms and we applaud, we forget that the same government using the same power can reverse it instantaneously. No one in India could have believed that the economy of a country could be halted in the way it was done in March this year. And it could be done because the central government invoked a central law. It was amazing. We legitimized the power of the state in 1991 reform, even though it reformed in a general direction which many of us applauded. It has come back to haunt us.
But there are two issues with that.
I'm not willing to make that mistake again.
But there are two issues with that, Barun, that come to my mind. The first thing is basically that even if we apply the principle of subsidiarity and power closest to the people, I think an issue like a common market, something which, basically the principle of free trade or common market is something that, let alone the central government, no government should have the power to restrict it. So any law which allows for a common market, which allows for free trade, whether it comes from the central government or from the state government or from the local government, is merely doing what is the natural, what should be happening naturally. That's one. And another thing is that even if we say state government, I mean, we have seen that there has been some power devolved to the state governments. And I have found that almost all state governments are very reluctant to pass this power down to the local governments. And this is something which is completely in their purview. It's not something which the central government can.
I agree with you on both points. The point is, and that's the whole point, that's the only point I have, that reform is not primarily a government initiative. Reforms, to have roots, have to be a people's initiative. We can't devolve power unless citizens demand that they actually should have the right to exercise that power. And that power can be exercised only at the local and the state level much more easily than at the national level. Which is why, to me, the state can only withdraw the heavy hand that it has imposed on many areas. What will come in its place ought to be left to the citizens to figure out how much restrictions or lack of it they are going to accept in their own areas. And people will learn from that experience, and some states will do better, others will do poorly, and people will learn and figure out what's an optimum at a given point in time. Otherwise, what we are saying, if you take logically what you are saying, that reforms can be centrally planned, that freedom can come through dictatorship. It can never come. Because a freedom that comes through dictatorship will always go out through that same dictatorship. Freedom to survive needs the support of the people. And what that means is, and which is what this discussion has shown, isn't it amazing that there's hardly any farmers organization that's coming out in support if this is such a big revolution? Because like you said, 75% of Indian farmers are not using the APMC in any case. So they don't even understand what is all this fuss about. Half the farmers are under some kind of contract. So if half the farmers say that they feel that they are under some kind of contract and accept those contracts, they don't understand what's the big deal about a new contract law. So what have you done?
One thing that that I feel is that the protests are that are happening are symbolic of something very different. I don't think that it really means that farmers do not support these reforms. I think what it means is that the farmers who lose out because of these reforms, or the farmers who think they might lose out because the MSP would be eliminated and the public procurement would be stopped maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, those farmers have they feel that they have a larger stake in this debate, and that's why they're coming out on roads to protest, while the others who might benefit and who may presume that they might benefit are also, they do not it's not a large stake battle for them, so they are definitely not going out on the roads to support it. That might be something which is tenable, according to me. Another thing I feel is that I spoke to farmers in Bihar. I did go out to some villages and spoke to farmers about these reforms, and most of them had not heard of it, honestly. Some of them had heard of it, um, and when I told them that, these are the provisions, literally telling them the provisions rather than, giving my opinion about it, most of them seemed very supportive of it. Again, this is an anecdotal this is anecdote, and this is definitely in no way an evidence or a data set concerning farmers support or of the current bills. So most of them said that the supply chain is very fragmented here, and I interacted with maize farmers primarily,
So,
and they said that they are getting.
If the farmer said, because I'm really interested in knowing, if the farmer said that the supply chain is fragmented, then 16 years or 15 years without APMC, why hasn't the supply chain developed? I'm really curious to understand it. I'm looking for an answer for this question.
So I think one thing that might be the reason behind it is that the interstate trade is still very restricted, and Bihar does not have industries. So nobody is processing that in Bihar. So nobody is processing food in Bihar that they will be procuring from farmers. So any procurement might be done from players outside Bihar, and there are two constraints. One is basically the roads in Bihar are still not that great, and that particular infrastructure that needs to be built, that hasn't been taken care of. That might be one reason, and the another reason is that the barriers on the interstate trade remained before this, right?
If you are following the two, in fact, just yesterday I was talking to a farmer in Bihar. These are, of course, larger farmers. They told me that two interesting stories. I have little experience of personal experience of Bihar, but this is what he told me. That much of the rice procured in Bihar by the state government for the PDS is sent to Sasaram. And Sasaram district apparently has a large base of rice millers. And the other story he told me is, that is part of the Bihar story, that is the corruption part of Bihar, that is the rice that is released or the rice that is allocated for the PDS is typically siphoned off and sent to UP for milling and selling into the market. And it comes back again as to Bihar during the procurement time as the new wheat, a new rice coming into the market, whereas it may have already come by one round trip through UP. The question is, these things are happening precisely because there are bottlenecks. Let's identify those bottlenecks and resolve it, rather than saying that I have a magic wand and I'm going to wave this and a revolution will happen. Because we don't understand why this is happening, therefore we think it doesn't exist. Of course, the farmers are selling and the goods are moving. How is maize moving if the roads were really impossible to navigate? How is rice going from Bihar to Bengal? How is it moving from Bihar to Uttar Pradesh, Eastern UP? Despite the challenges, the informal economy moves. The question is to identify each of those small challenges and figure out how to resolve it, rather than providing a big canvas which will simply get captured by people who are big enough to manipulate and capture those. That is my fear. Like I said, I am now willing to say that I have a mixed feeling about 1991 itself. Because while we can say that we enjoyed the benefit of 1991 reforms, 2020 will be remembered as the price we are paying for the centralization of reforms that happened in 1991 and right through 1991 and for the next 25 years. To me, this is completely unacceptable. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes again.
Makes sense, sir. So there are two things, sir. One is basically the informal economy here. Definitely that should not be criminalized and all that is there. But then again, the informal economy here is also ridden with quite a lot of inefficiencies. So what happens here is when I was talking to farmers, they said, and of course these are really small farmers. These are farmers with a land holding of 1 to 2, 3 acres maybe, and few people who have somewhere around 5 to 10 acres at most. So basically they were telling that they sell it to a local banya, and that person basically sells it to somebody in the district headquarter, and that person then sells it to somebody. So there are way too many aggregators in this whole supply chain, and since it's informal, that's why I think it's happening. Otherwise it could have been also more streamlined in a way.
The question you need to ask is, why is it informal? No, question is not that it is informal. We know 40% of Indian economy is informal. And much of India's agriculture is informal. But the question to ask is why?
Definitely. So one reason definitely is that it was something which was earlier illegal. So that might be one reason. Another thing is definitely that the agri supply chain itself, like across India, has been very fractured.
Yeah, but that is the consequence of the law. That's the consequence of the law. That's not a consequence of any economic.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. So so basically,
those laws identify specifics of where those bottlenecks are. Identify specific bottlenecks where it has occurred and figure out what's to be done.
So, sir, one thing that I could definitely identify.
If you are still in Bihar, I don't know where you are located now. But if you are still in Bihar,
I'm in East Champaran.
Okay, you are in East Champaran. Then it would be really interesting for all of us to know that how is it that in the last 10, 15 years, the abolition of APMC seems to have made hardly any difference or no difference. Yet the networks related to the Makka, the maize, developed precisely during this period. So I'm really curious to know how is it that the general improvement that any one of us would have expected, and many of us actually were very happy that Bihar was setting the standard by abolishing APMC. But then nothing happened 16 years. And now I know that in the last 10, 15 years, if there is one major success story, agricultural success story in Bihar, it is maize, Makkah. So how did that sector develop? How did the infrastructure, how did the supply chain, how did the logistics, how did the marketing and all of it develop in case of Makkah and not so much in other areas? I'm really curious to know.
So from my very limited experience, because I was visiting maize farmers, what I felt is that the larger farmers are able to get better prices, but with small farmer, what happens is that since there are way too many people in supply chain, and even this year they were getting a price which is definitely much below the market price of maize in average market price of maize in the national market. So I'm not sure if it's quite a big success story of sorts.
No, it is a success story. I mean, if you look at the data, the maize is Bihar's success story. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. It has grown to a scale which no one would have predicted 10 years ago. Even the Bihar had no idea that it has grown that much. The question is that success story, what factors that led to it? This year, we can ignore because we know that there was a major external factor such as COVID and lockdown and the feed industry, which is what is the main market for the Makkah, for the maize, that virtually collapsed. And therefore, the prices of maize have fallen this year substantially everywhere across the country. And therefore, Bihar is also no exception to that. But this year, if you leave out the exceptional lockdown-related issues this year, we should look at last 10 years and see what has been the performance of maize in Bihar, because maize was not a major crop in Bihar. Today, it has become a major crop in Bihar.
Yeah, so a lot of these people shifted to maize because they were not really getting good prices for both rice and wheat. That's from my limited experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's
So yeah, I would try to probe more on this, and since Chakravarti sir is back, we could get back to him and let him finish his point.
No. So I'm terribly sorry. I will apologize and explain it to you offline. How I messed up today's webinar. But the only point I was trying to make was the example I was giving was maize, where the government whimsically changes policy. I think in this case, what happened was the chicken lobby has complained that the cost of their inputs is higher, and they've changed the policy, and it really affected the maize farmer. And the same thing with the onions that they have done before. And I have horror stories to share about cotton. This was during the UPA government. In fact, I was at my farm during the harvesting season. And just overnight, I think, if I remember correctly, Sharad Pawar was the agriculture minister. And overnight, they have banned cotton exports because the spinning mills have lobbied and said their input costs are higher. And the farmer today was selling it, if I remember correctly, at 4,200 rupees a quintal. The next day, it dropped down to 3,500, and the day after to 3,000. I mean, wiped out, right? It's just like that, with just a stroke of a pen with a signature, they wiped millions of farmers out. And that's the kind of power that the government has. And I was only saying, at least, some restriction has been removed, but they have put the 50% and 100%, which is not ideal. And Barun and I both would love to have all the entire gutted Essential Commodities Act. If they just gutted it, it would be ideal. But
no, just 1 second, Chakravarti. Actually, the current onion restriction didn't come through essential commodities.
And that was
it came through the Foreign Trade Act.
And cotton and maize, Are the Foreign Trade Act or Essential Commodity?
Yeah, the Foreign Trade Act is applicable to external trade irrespective of essential commodity, because essential commodity is a domestic law.
Right.
Foreign Trade Act is the one that regulates exports and imports.
Okay. I'm glad to know. I'm glad you corrected. And the similar thing, as I said, I've seen that happen with red gram. I've seen that happen with cotton. They have not, as Barun had said, messed around with fruit so much, even though they said fruits, they've put 100%, I think was the limit for the government to intervene because it comes under perishables. I personally see 300% fluctuation every year. So if they want to interfere, that would be, a terrible thing for the government to interfere in that space. But they, at 100% fluctuations, I see it every year seasonally. Now, so does that empower government? Yes, but I still feel it's a step in the right direction in the sense that they realize that it's doing a lot of harm and how the bureaucracies are misusing. As I said, a farmer who was taking it to the market yard to sell his red gram was arrested and paraded as a trader who was hoarding red gram.
Exactly.
That's how bad it was. So, and the market yards here locally are horror stories as well, where I was surprised actually when I started farming. I was taking my grain directly to Hyderabad and I was stopped and said, pay the market yard fee. And at least they should change the name of the fee. I said, I didn't come to the market yard. Why am I paying the market yard fee? And they said, it doesn't matter. So they'll stop the truck and say, either you pay, if you don't pay, your truck is stranded here. Then I said, okay, they are taking advantage of illiterate farmers. I should pay market yard fee only if I'm going to the market. Exactly. And then I dug up the act. I looked through it. It very clearly is written in the act that every farmer in my mandal should pay the market yard fee, even if they do not go to the market yard. It's unbelievable. It is there in the act. So any trader who comes to the farm gate and buys it from a farmer and directly taking away to the next nearest town cannot cross the town without paying the market yard fee.
Exactly.
And the way I got away is I found one small clause somewhere where it says if a farmer himself is moving the produce, then there is no fee. There was, it was like randomly hidden in some fine print somewhere, which I was able to pull out, and then I had to fight with the market yard and they let me go because they just didn't want to deal with me. So overall, Varun, I agree with all the concerns that you have raised. I said I don't have any issues, but I think the bigger issue is this whole bill has been demonized, and the misinformation that is happening in terms of the traditional leftist arguments that big business will take over agriculture, small farmer cannot stand up to the big business, there should be a status quo in APMCs. I mean, I sell in APMC. I don't particularly have a problem with APMC, but I wouldn't mind having access to more markets. Again, today I don't see any problem as such. I think Akash, you said 75% of the trade happens outside APMC.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. But again,
if they're
as I added, I feel that 75%.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I feel that 75% trade is again, since it's of informal nature, this informal has been made illegal by the government itself. It's nobody else who's making it illegal, right? So as you said, you were asked for tariff to be paid to the APMC when you were moving your produce. So that is being done. Even if it's not being done, it's still of an illegal and informal nature. I'm not saying that it should be illegal, but it was illegal up until this point. So that is something that I still find a welcome improvement. And I think that it would basically help the new supply chains come up.
It is not a leap. It is not a leap, but it is a small step. And my only thing is, if we acknowledge that it is as a small step and demand more reforms, um, I think that would be a better approach um, than completely trashing the bill as it's inconsequential or does more harm. I think
No,
that's
that is
essentially what
possible. That would be possible, Chakravarti, if APMC and trade reforms were being debated and implemented at the state level. Having done it nationally, now it is almost impossible. Just like changing the GST rates is so very difficult, because to arrive at a national consensus in today's polarized times is very difficult. But I think, I think we just move to one issue which I think is related to these bills, which is a broader issue of agriculture, and which I think is fundamental to all this discussion, which is, and the government has repeated it, that 50% of the population dependent on 15% of the GDP that is agriculture, is an unviable model. No one disagrees. But why is it that 50% of the population is still dependent on 15% of the GDP? Survey after survey have found that 2/3 of the farmers would like to quit farming. At least they wouldn't like their children to take up farming. The question is, where will they go? It is very grandiose for the government to say that we are going to free up the agricultural labor and they'll move. What's the state of affairs in the rest non-agriculture economy? And not just due to lockdown for the last 3-4 years. Where are they? Where will they go? The migrant labor actually illustrates the desperate state of rural labor who are desperately looking for alternative outside of agriculture. What have we created?
Definitely.
What have we created?
Barun,
Another layer of informality.
That's definitely there, but having said all that, the farmers definitely need to have that choice. They should be the people who should be deciding
Aren't
it.
they exercising
And
that
I
choice?
think I think one thing which is definitely a roadblock in them exercising this choice is the land control. And then again, that needs to be done by the states. That the leveling of land as agriculture land or business land, and if it's an agriculture land, they can just sell it to other farmers. That is something that also needs to go. But again, I mean, I just step back and I'll just state one opposition that I keep hearing, and this is something which stands in stark contrast with the data that you cited, saying that most farmers don't want to continue farming, or at least they don't want their children to take up farming. And we listen to this particular argument both from the left and from the nativist right at times as well, that that there is an attempt to take away the land from farmers, and this is an attempt to bring big businesses in. And the farmers, the most important asset to a farmer is his land. So things like this. So if we basically even if I'm pretty sure that if there is a reform which gives the farmer the choice to sell their land to others, there would again these arguments would again prop up. And more than this, I would just cite a few other arguments, and I would because we have not been able to discuss this, that I've heard these arguments all over in Hindi media as well as sometimes in English media as well, that now that the Essential Commodities Act has been changed, there would definitely be collusion of traders, and there would be stocking, and the black market would come up, things like this. There's a demand for MSP in private sector. Then they say that multinational companies would come in agriculture, and since there is a power differential, they will all cheat farmers. So these are kind of the things which I think we need to push back on,
No,
because
so see
it
that
also.
I think you made some great points, and that was my submission to Barun as well. You just take the issue of hoarding, right? Hoarding is a very, very healthy economic activity. The government as well as the leftist intellectuals do not even have a basic understanding of how important an economic activity hoarding is. The person who hoards it at a great risk, and he helps in keeping the prices steady, and he does a great service of providing the hoarded commodities in the times of scarcity. And that is the voice that only liberals can raise and communicate with conviction, when the entire intellectual argument today is propagating so many misinformation and disinformation. I feel we have a role to play there than finding what more should have been done in the bill. I agree. I mean, a lot more should have been done. It's a small step. They are, the politicians are politicians. They're calling it a revolution. It's akin to the 90s, early 90s liberalization. This will transform India. A lot of megalomaniacal statements. But there's also these traditional arguments have again come up. The big businesses will take over. The small farmer will be destroyed. The hoarding will come, and then scarcity will be created. And I feel people like Barun and I have a role there in terms of dispelling some of those arguments.
Actually, Chakravarti, I completely agree with you. And only thing I would like to submit is that this dispelling, is irrelevant on the media, newspaper, or television, etc. The primary requirement, I think, is, and which I've been trying for the last few years, is to try and reach out to farmers themselves. That is where I believe I'm not so concerned about the voices raised by the left in the media, etc. Because to me, they're irrelevant on the ground. And last year, we were involved with some friends, the Shetkari Sangatana in Maharashtra, in a campaign in sowing unauthorized, unapproved, genetically modified cotton. I was amazed that here were a few thousand farmers sowing the cotton, illegal cotton, so to say, on their own farms, whereas the left and the critics, the environmentalists and whoever, they made statements in Delhi and Bombay and wherever, but never came to the ground. I think that is our biggest asset. If we can reach out to real farmers on the ground, this opposition that we think are so big, whether it's coming from the left or the right, doesn't matter. Because it really doesn't matter on the ground. If we can make a difference on the ground, we are on a solid and a winning wicket. Which is why I really think, that my worry, I think you were cut off. My worry is not that these are revolutionary changes. My worry is that even if these were revolutionary changes, these kind of top-down changes only legitimizes the government at the national level. And therefore, the government can turn the tap, close the tap anytime it wants.
So
that
allow me to make
fundamental opposition to doing reforms to the top.
But allow me to make the counter argument. Again, I have a great deal of respect. I'm not saying it. It's not one of those. What's this guy who's yaps on TV, Republic TV fellow?
I don't watch news channels, so forget it. Yeah.
I don't know what his name is, but anyway. So let me offer you a counter argument. See, at the farmer level, the decisions are being made at the state level or the central government level. And I'll give you an example of how I was practically affected. This is again going back to the cotton. This is this year, not even last year. Some farmers have gotten some BT strain of cotton seed they have planted, which is resistant to weedicide.
HTBT.
Is that what it is called?
Herbicide tolerant BT.
Herbicide tolerant BT. And the government says the farmers cannot use it.
Correct.
in order to prevent the farmers from using it, because the biggest cost for Akshay and Ayman, if you don't know, when you plant cotton, one of the big expense is removing the weed.
Correct.
The weed today is removed manually. Literally, scores of women go into the fields and pluck the weed out with hand. And where a bullock cart can go, a bull is used to remove some of the weed, but it can't remove all of it. It removes about 60-70%, and remaining 30% of the weed is removed by hand. It's a huge expense for farmer. So this herbicide resistant cotton variety that Barun had just mentioned is a boon. It's a blessing. But the government banned it. But the farmer is smart. I mean, he'll smuggle it from wherever he can get. He will even go to Western countries and gets it. Whatever it takes, they'll get it. You know how the government handled it? They simply banned the herbicide. It blew my mind away. My state just doesn't grow cotton. I grow oranges. So if you ban herbicide, what happens to the orange grower? What happens to all the other papaya fruit grower, pomegranate grower? They just banned. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Did you know that, Barun? That
Yes, I mean, I didn't know. I've been partly following the story in Andhra and Telangana, where this has been an off and on story. But in Maharashtra, where it was on the ground, the government had to kind of back off from doing that. So now the central government is bringing in a law.
Right. So they have banned completely the herbicide, which means I can, for the sake of cotton farmers, they have destroyed every other farmer. My weed has grown, waist high. What do we do? I mean, I can't have, weed removed by hand. I mean, it's just economics don't support that kind of activity. And where I was going with that, Barun, is these decisions are being made in a centralized fashion at the state and central level. And these intellectuals sitting in the cities are able to influence the decision makers, and farmers have no role in it.
Now, this is where I will disagree on that last sentence that you said.
Go ahead.
That is,
help me understand.
The decisions are made at the state and the central level, no doubt. But the decisions are made in the way they are made precisely because the decision makers do not see any political capital on the other side, on the ground. The HTBT campaign of the last few years, particularly Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Telangana, Andhra Pradesh too, have been an amazing experience of how, when the farmers really get involved, the state has to virtually willy-nilly turn a blind eye, if not change the law. Can you believe that in 2017, the government of India's own survey found that 15% of cotton in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Telangana were HTBT, herbicide tolerant? 15%. They were not getting smuggled from abroad. The seeds were being produced in India, in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh, in Gujarat, and in other places. That is the power of the market, and that is the power because so many farmers have spoken with their own wallet, so to say, that they want to save their cotton. They want to reduce the cost of labor, like you said. The weed picking is one of the most expensive exercises. And therefore, they have gone out of the way to figure out how to resolve it. And the government didn't even know till 15% of the farmers they surveyed and found that they are already HTBT. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, a senior journalist who follows agriculture told me that he first detected herbicide-tolerant cotton in Maharashtra in 2012, 8 years ago. That is the power of the ground.
No, but Barun, it could have been 100% if it was legal. We are doing it like thieves.
Correct. I completely agree. Which is why we got to mobilize the people to show the political capital. That this is not an intellectual issue. This is a life and death issue for the farmers. And therefore, if the farmers speak up, the state will either turn a blind eye or they'll change the law.
Agreed, but I'm just saying that the wise, knowledgeable Barun Mitra speaking up in the intellectual forums where some of these decisions are being made will have an impact at the decision maker level.
No,
The
zero,
person who wrote
zero,
that, the
zero
person who
impact.
wrote that government order, the person who wrote that government order, I actually have that government order. I can send it to you. Is clueless of the consequences of his decision. I don't think he even spent 3, 4, 5 hours thinking about if I pass this GO, what will happen?
You have no idea of the chains through which they operate, and you are underestimating the bureaucracy. No matter what we say on television or newspaper will make a difference. You know why? I'm speaking from my own experience and my only experience at the grassroots. That is 20 years ago when BT cotton originally came into India in 1998-2000. It came in exactly in the same way. I don't know if you were farming in 2000. Were you, Chakravarti?
No, I started in 2012.
So in 1998-2000, that was the period I really saw how the grassroots makes a difference, because I came to know Sharad Joshi, one of the unique leaders of the farmers movement from Maharashtra. And exactly what is happening with HTBT, herbicide tolerant cotton today in the last few years happened with BT cotton in the late 90s and 2000. Exact replica. But once the farmers spoke, and this I know because I was there. In 2002, Sharad Joshi got a group of farmers from Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab with their cotton to meet the government, saying that this is BT cotton. Tell me what you're going to do about it. Within a month, the government changed the law. That was Sharad Joshi's single biggest success in getting the only GM crop approved in India in the last 20 years.
So we'd need to close in a few minutes, Barun. But if I might add, we've also seen that the anti-GM lobby, which is filled with people who are mostly not working at the grassroots, but they are some sort of opinion makers in New Delhi, and people who go around, talking about or spreading rumors about possible consequences of GM food. So those people also build influence, and that's why we have not seen much progress on that front, right?
Their influence is limited. Their influence is great when the debate is limited to the offices in Delhi or the state capital. Once we go into the ground, they are non-existent, which is why I'd like to ask Chakravarti that these farmers who are growing herbicide-tolerant cotton, did any environmentalists come and say that what are you doing and this is illegal?
No, environmentalists are always in the city, Barun, and they don't come to the rural areas. But the point is this, right? What I'm saying is there is a prevailing economic ideology among the bureaucracy and the political class, which leads to some of these decisions being made. And I feel we have a role in doing re-education, right? So in your case, you have done grassroots work with the cotton, but in my case here in Telangana, not a peep. Nobody said a word. Glyphosate got by. So how can we? Onions policy changes, maize policy changes, red gram policy changes, cotton policy changes. And every time, there can't be a grassroots movement. The real problem is ideology. Ideologically, I think we've been brainwashed for nearly 7 decades in India to believe this socialist mindset of license raj and protectionist thinking. And I think that thinking should be changed. I'm not opposing to the grassroots at all. But I think when an ideological change happens, then these knee-jerk kind of policy changes won't come that easily. I don't think they'll be eliminated, but I think it'll be harder.
Having spent all my life in Delhi, I mean 30 years in Delhi, perhaps I always look at the grass to be greener on the ground.
So with that thought, we can close this session. It was a very, very interesting discussion. And I think, I mean, there was just so much that we barely scratched the surface. I mean, we could go on for, hours and hours. But thanks a lot for joining us, Varun and Chakravarti. And we look forward to having you on next few SFL events as well.
Thank you, Akash. Thanks, SFL, for having us. Thank you. Thank you, Akash. Thank you. You know, people of your generation, Ayman, you, and you all give us hope for keeping the spirit of liberty alive. And we have a lot of work ahead, and let's continue to plow through. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having organizing this.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.